Welcome back, everyone. This is Professor Cameron from the Wentworth Institute of Technology. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be finishing up this assembly. Now, in the previous videos, we went through creating all of the various parts for this assembly. What we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and put this assembly together. Now, we're going to do this in a similar fashion to how we created that assembly a couple videos ago, that block and pin assembly. So what we can do is we can go ahead to File, New, and we're going to select New Assembly File. Now, like always, whenever we start a new assembly, it's going to want us to insert our first piece into this assembly. We always want that to be our base piece or our foundation piece. What we're going to do is we're going to go to Browse, and we are going to open up our base. This piece right here. And we can just place this down anywhere in our workspace for now. Now, once we have our first piece in, what we have to do is go ahead and insert our subsequent pieces. You can do this sort of one level of parts at a time, or you can bring in everything at once. I like to bring them in one level of parts at a time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our Assembly tab. We're going to go to Insert Components. We can go to Browse. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our bracket. Now, like always, whenever we insert a piece into an assembly, we want to place our parts off to the side. Now this assembly, it's going to call for 2 brackets. We can go back into Insert Components, Browse, and then open up another bracket. A faster way is to press and hold your Control key on your keyboard, click on the part that you want to copy, and then just drag out a duplicate. You can click and set that down. And that's a quick way to bring in a whole bunch of pieces at the same time. I'm going to drag this off to the side for now. We're just going to focus on one bracket and the base. Now what we want to do first is get this bracket to sit on top of this base. We wanted to get it to sit on the same level. Now just like we did in our last assembly, we're going to use our Mate tool. It's the tool that looks like a paperclip under our Assembly tab. Now all we have to do with this tool is to select the 2 surfaces that we want to stick together. In our case, we're going to stick the top of our base and the bottom of our bracket together. So we can open up our Mate tool and we can select those 2 surfaces, the top of the base and the bottom of the bracket. And we can go ahead and select OK. And you can see it put those 2 parts on the same level. So once we have our bracket sitting on top of our base, what we have to do is figure out how to get this to sit right where we want it. Now we have 2 methods to do this. We could mate the sides together, and that would work just fine. That would position our bracket right where we need it on our base. The problem with that, though, is if we made an error earlier, and there's an issue with the screw hole spacing in our bracket or our base, that's not a mistake we would realize until we had the parts made and we tried to fit these parts together in real life. And by then it's a little too late. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to mate it together using the screw holes. This way, if our assembly goes together, we know that it will go together in real life. It's generally a good practice when you're building assemblies to mate them using the critical mate features that your parts have that you need to line up. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our Mate tool and we're going to mate the screw holes together. So we want to make sure that when we do this, we select the surface. we don't want to select an edge. That'll give us difficulties later on. We want to select the surface here on the bracket and the accompanying surface on the base. And we can select OK. And what that's going to leave us with is a situation where this bracket can pivot around this base. Now to get this to rotate into alignment and to sit right where we need it, we're just going to do that same mate with the other set of screw holes. If our screw hole spacing is correct here, this should rotate in nicely and affix itself in place. If it doesn't, that means there is an issue with the screw hole spacing in either your bracket or your base. So you'll have to address that. But what we can do is we can go to mate and literally just the same mate we did a second ago. We're going to select those two surfaces. Our part rotates nicely, and we're going to select OK. And that looks pretty good. Now we can go ahead and find our other bracket that we dragged off here. And we're going to do the same three mates that we just did with this first bracket. Now you may notice that my bracket is facing the wrong way. We want this little protrusion here to face inwards. All we have to do to fix that is when it comes time to mate the screw holes, we're just going to cross the screw holes that we're going to mate. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But we can start off with grabbing our mate tool and selecting the top of our base and the bottom of our bracket, right like that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to cross the screw holes that we mated. And that's going to allow this bracket to pivot. And when we go ahead and mate that second set, it's going to rotate it into the proper alignment. Now at this stage, this is probably a good place to go ahead and save your assembly. You can just go ahead and save that right now. Once we have these brackets mated, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and insert those pins that fit in these screw holes. We can go to Insert Components, and we can open up that pin. This stubby little pin right here. We can just place this off to the side. Now we're going to need 4 of these pins, so we can use the same technique that we did to copy the bracket. We're going to press and hold our Control key, click, and then just drag out 4 pins. Now these pins are going to mate really simply with just 2 mates. What we're going to do first is we're going to first start by mating this curved inside surface of the hole, the same surface we used to position the bracket. And we're going to mate that to this curved outside surface of the pin. We can grab our mate tool. Now when we put this mate in, what we want to do is we want to check this box right here, lock rotation. That's going to prevent that pin from spinning, similar to how we prevented the pin from spinning in the first assembly we made a couple videos ago. And we can select OK. And what that's going to leave us with is a situation where this pin can shuttle up and down. To get this pin to sit flush in this assembly, we're going to go ahead and mate the top of the pin, the top flat surface of the pin, to this top lip here of the bracket. It's going to push that pin in and cause it to sit flush in the assembly. So with just those 2 mates, we've fully constrained that pin. And all we're going to do now is just spend a second and go ahead and do those same 2 mates with our remaining 3 pins. And again, That was this curved outside surface here of the pin to the curved inside surface here of the screw hole, being short to lock rotation when we do that. And then it's going to be the top of the pin to this top lip of the bracket. And when we're done, our assembly should look something like this. And that looks pretty good. To continue this, what we're going to do next is insert our axle. I'm going to go to Insert Components and open up that axle that we made. Now when we mate this, this is going to mate just like a pin does. We're going to mate this curved surface here on the axle to this curved surface in that cutout in the bracket. So we can select those two surfaces in the mate tool, and again, we want to select lock rotation when we do this. And just like with those pins, this axle is going to be able to shuttle back in this assembly. So to get this pin to sit flush, we're going to make this flat spot on the end of the axle to this backside surface of the bracket. So we can open up our mate tool, select those two surfaces, and select OK. That's going to push that pin in there and lock that pin in place. If you haven't done so, you can go ahead and save this assembly. And now to insert our last piece, we can go ahead and insert our wheel. Now the first step of this is going to be very similar to how we mated the pins and to how we mated the axle. We're going to mate this curved surface here of the axle to this curved surface here in the wheel, being sure to lock rotation when you do that. And just like with our pins and the axle, that's going to be able to shuttle back and forth on this track. Now, we want this wheel to sit in the center of this assembly, but we have a slight problem with that. If you'll notice, this wheel is a little bit smaller than the width between those two brackets. So we can't just make two surfaces cleanly. We're going to have to do something else here. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull this wheel all the way out. Now, if you haven't done so already, this would be a good time to set your units to millimeters. It's not as critical to do this in an assembly as it is in a part file, because we're not actually defining the size of anything. So we can change this at any time, and it shouldn't impact our assembly any. But what we're going to do is we're going to mate this surface here to this surface here on the bracket. We're going to mate these two flat spots together. But we're not going to click OK right away, and you'll see why in just a second. So when I go to my mate tool and I select those two surfaces, what it's going to do is it's going to make those two surfaces touch each other. It's going to suck those two surfaces together, and it's going to leave a large gap on the other side. That's not quite what we want. We want these two surfaces to space apart, leaving an equal gap on either side. To do that, if we look at our left-hand side, we'll see an icon here called distance. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select that icon. If this icon is grayed out, if it doesn't let you select this, check right here. It should say face 1 and face 2. If either one of those is an edge, what you've done is you've selected the edge as opposed to the face, and it won't work for you. So just exit out and go back into the mate tool and make sure you select the face. But what we're going to do in that box is we're going to select that distance icon, and then in this text box, we're going to type in 3 millimeters. And that's going to take those two surfaces and space them apart by exactly 3 millimeters. And that's going to leave an equal gap on both sides for us. Once we've done that, we can select OK. And this assembly is fully put together. We can tell that because when we check down here, our assembly reads fully defined. So what we can do at this point, we can go ahead and save this assembly. We're still going to work with this because just like we did with the assembly a few weeks ago, we want to determine the center of mass. Our mass and volume are already determined, but when Solidworks takes the center of mass, it takes it from the center of mass of these 3 planes of the assembly. So just like we did in our previous videos, we're going to mate our model to these 3 planes. Now, if we tried to do that right now, that would not work for us. Because our model's fully defined, it's not going to move. And you can try that. You can click on this model, and it will tell you it's fully defined and cannot move. When you insert your first piece into the assembly, Solidworks will lock it in place. If you look right here at your first piece in your feature tree, it will have a little F in parentheses next to it. That F stands for fixed. What we have to do is right-click on this part and choose the option called float. That F in parentheses will disappear. Our model will be underdefined, and we should be able to click and drag this assembly around right now. If your model won't move, the next steps won't work for you. So make sure you've floated that base. What we're going to do is we're going to press Control 7. That's going to put our workspace into an isometric view. We're going to go to our Mate tool, and we're going to expand this drop-down tree right here. All we want to do is get our assembly sitting on the top plane. From this drop-down tree, we're going to choose our top plane, and we're going to mate that to the bottom flat surface of our assembly and click OK. Once we've done that, we are going to select our front plane. We want to mate our front plane to this short side of the base right here. Now, before we click OK on this, what we want to verify is that our model is sitting on the far side of the plane. There are 2 orientations this will exist in. As it's sitting now on the far side of the plane, or on the close side of the plane. If your model is sitting like this on the close side of the plane, on your left-hand side over here, you have a Mate Alignment button. These buttons will toggle your model back and forth over that plane. We just want to make sure that it's sitting on the far side. And we can go ahead and select OK. And finally, we are going to mate our right plane to this large, skinny backside surface right here. Before you select OK on this, press Control 7. You want to verify that your model is sitting on the close side of this plane. If you've done that, you can go ahead and select OK. And if you've done everything properly, your model should now be fully defined, and your origin should be in this back left-hand corner. What you guys can do is you can go ahead and save this model right now. You can save this assembly. And then to check your mass properties, you're going to check it just like you do a part. You're going to go to your Evaluate tab and Mass Properties. If you guys have any questions on this assembly, please feel free to reach out to me. And as always, have a nice day.